May 8, 1945. 14:37 hours. In a makeshift prisoner of war camp near Ries, France, the war was over, but the terror had just begun. For Second Lieutenant Greta Hoffmann, a 26-year-old nurse in the German 12th Army, this was the end of the world she knew. She stood among a wretched flock of 347 captured German women, the final remnants of a collapsed Reich. For 4 agonizing days, they had been marched over 55 miles of broken earth, with no food, no clean water, sleeping in ditches like discarded refuse. Their uniforms were shredded, caked in a grotesque plaster of dried mud and blood. Somber music begins the stench of sweat, fear, and utter despair was a physical wall, so thick that their American guards maintained a deliberate distance of 16 feet. Greta's eyes scanned the faces of the women around her. They were hollowed-out masks of humanity, their eyes sunken into dark pits of exhaustion. Open sores festered on their feet where military-issue boots had ground their skin to pulp. For 6 long years, the relentless machinery of Reich propaganda had hammered one message into their souls. They knew exactly what to expect if they fell into American hands. Rape. Torture. Summary execution. The propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, had been chillingly clear. The Americans are beasts without honor, his voice had crackled over the radio. They will treat our women as the Soviets treated the German women in the East. Greta had seen the faked photographs, read the inflammatory pamphlets, listened to the coached testimonies of soldiers who swore they had witnessed American atrocities. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that it was all a meticulously crafted lie. And the truth she was about to discover would bring her to her knees and make her weep for reasons she never could have imagined. Sound of heavy boots on gravel. An American sergeant from the 79th Infantry Battalion moved toward the huddled group, an interpreter at his side. The man was a giant, built like an oak tree, 6'2", weighing a solid 210 pounds. His arms were as thick as fence posts. Strapped to his belt, catching the afternoon sun, was an M3 combat knife. This was Sergeant James Miller, 31 years old. Greta's heart hammered against her ribs. Instinctively, she took a step back, a move mirrored by every woman around her. They pressed closer together, a herd of cornered animals awaiting the predator's strike. Miller saw the terror rippling through the crowd. He stopped, holding up his hands in a universal gesture of peace. The interpreter's voice cut through the tense silence. "We need to inspect each prisoner. It is protocol. Please, form a single line." The women remained frozen, a statue of collective fear. Miller let out a weary sigh. He walked directly toward Greta, who stood at the front of the pack. "You first," the interpreter said. Dramatic musical sting. "If you want to witness the exact moment 6 years of Nazi propaganda crumbled into dust, do us a favor and smash that like button. It tells the algorithm that these are the stories that need to be told, the real stories that expose the truth behind the lies of war." Greta trembled violently as Sergeant Miller closed the distance. Her eyes were locked on the M3 knife. Its blade was 6.5 inches long, sharpened on both edges for maximum lethality. He stopped just 2 feet from her. His face was a stone mask, showing no emotion, no pity, no malice. It was worse than hate. It was indifference. "Raise your arms," he ordered through the interpreter. Slowly, Greta obeyed. Her hands shook so badly, she could barely keep them level. Miller's gaze was clinical, sweeping over her tattered uniform. Tense, atmospheric, music. The German military dress was ripped in several places. A dark, flaking stain of dried blood marked her left shoulder, a memento from a wounded soldier she'd tended to 3 days ago. But the most critical detail was invisible to the naked eye from a distance. After 4 days of marching through the rubble of Germany, after sleeping in abandoned barns and bombed-out buildings, the uniform was infested. Lice were an inevitability. Miller could see them now, tiny dark specks moving in the seams of the collar and cuffs. Sound of a knife being unsheathed with a sharp shing. He drew the M3 combat knife. A raw, Primal scream tore from Greta's throat. Please. Please no. She tried to scramble backward, but an American guard behind her seized her arms in an iron grip. Miller stepped forward. Greta squeezed her eyes shut, hot tears streaming down her filth-streaked face. She waited for the searing pain, for the ultimate humiliation, for the final, brutal confirmation that all the propaganda was true. Then she felt it. The cold, flat steel of the blade touched her right shoulder. With one swift, practiced motion, Miller sliced through the fabric of her sleeve, from shoulder to elbow. Sound of fabric ripping. Nothing more. Greta's eyes fluttered open, her mind reeling in confusion. Miller moved to her other arm and repeated the cut. Then, with the same deliberate care, he slit the side seams of her dress, from her armpits down to her waist. The uniform fell open, but she was still covered by the undergarments beneath. Miller sheathed his knife with a dull click. "Take off the uniform," the interpreter commanded. "You are going to receive clean clothes and delousing." Greta was paralyzed. The words made no sense. This wasn't rape. This wasn't torture. The interpreter repeated the order, his voice patient. "We are not harming you. Your uniform is infested with lice. If we do not remove it now, the entire area will become contaminated. You will receive a hot shower, disinfected clothing, and medical attention. It is sanitary protocol." Greta stared at Miller. The hulking sergeant was already moving to the next prisoner, ready to do the exact same thing. There was no violence in his actions, no sadistic pleasure, just cold, clinical efficiency. Greta's tears changed, shifting from pure terror to a complex cocktail of emotions, confusion, profound relief, and something else she couldn't yet name. It was shame. A deep, burning shame for ever having believed the lies. The Americans hadn't come to violate them. They had come to delouse them. The U.S. Army protocol for prisoners of war was unambiguous, documented in Field Manual FM 19-40, updated in 1943. Every captured prisoner was to undergo a delousing process within the first 24 hours. Step 1. Visual inspection for signs of contagious disease or infestation. Step 2. Removal of infested uniforms, using a combat knife to cut them away to prevent the further spread of lice during normal removal. Dramatic pause. Step 3. A mandatory shower with hot water and disinfectant soap for a minimum of 10 minutes. Step 4. A medical inspection for sores, infections, or wounds requiring treatment. Step 5. Provision of clean prisoner uniforms or, in extreme cases, surplus American civilian clothing. This process wasn't born from kindness. It was born from brutal, military pragmatism. Music swells. Lice carry typhus. Typhus can incinerate an entire army in weeks. One infested prisoner in an unsanitized camp could trigger an epidemic that would kill prisoners and guards alike, with total impartiality. The Americans weren't being nice. They were being smart. But for the German women who had been steeling themselves for barbarity, that pragmatism felt like an impossible act of mercy. Type protocol. In the comments if this incredible, untold piece of history is blowing your mind. Greta let the shredded remains of her uniform fall to the ground. All around her, 346 other women did the same. They stood in their underclothes, vulnerable, exposed, waiting for the next horror to unfold. Instead, a group of women from the U.S. Army Nurse Corps appeared, carrying stacks of towels and bars of soap. Women, not soldiers. Not men with violent intent. Lieutenant Sarah Bennett, a 29-year-old nurse from Ohio, approached Greta, holding out a clean towel. "The shower is over there," she said in clear English. The interpreter translated. "Hot water. Disinfectant soap. Take your time." Greta couldn't move. She was sobbing again, but this time from a place of shattered certainty. Why are you treating us like this?" she asked in German, her voice breaking. "You're supposed to hate us." The interpreter relayed the question to Lieutenant Bennett. The American nurse looked Greta directly in the eyes. Her gaze was steady, her voice devoid of malice. "Because you are prisoners of war, not animals," she said. "And we are not Nazis." The answer struck Greta with the force of a physical blow. For 6 years, she had been told the Americans were monsters. For 6 years, she had been told Germany was the bastion of civilization, defending itself from barbarism. And here she stood, a defeated enemy, being treated with more dignity by her captors than her own regime had shown its people in the final, desperate months of the war. The showers were a makeshift assembly of canvas curtains and pipes connected to a military hot water generator. Greta stepped inside, and the hot water hit her body. Sound of running water. Gentle music. It was the first time she had felt hot water in 7 weeks. She wept openly under the spray, not from pain, but from relief, from confusion, from the sound of her entire worldview cracking and breaking apart inside her. The disinfectant soap had a harsh, chemical smell, but it was cleaning her. She watched the mud, the dried blood, the layers of grime spiral down the drain. She stayed in the shower for 18 minutes. No one hurried her. No one watched her. When she emerged, a nurse was waiting with a dry towel. She was given clean undergarments and a simple prisoner's uniform made of gray cotton. It wasn't elegant, but it was clean. It had no lice. Lieutenant Bennett then handed her something else, a small packet of bandages and a tube of antibiotic ointment. "For the sores on your feet," the interpreter explained. "Treat them now, before they become infected." Greta stared at the medical supplies in her hand. Back in Germany, during the final months, even frontline soldiers rarely had enough bandages. And here, her enemies were giving her precious medical supplies to treat mere blisters. The propaganda had not prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for the profound humiliation of discovering that everything she had been taught, everything she had believed, was a lie. If you're still watching, you're not just a viewer, you're a witness to history. Hit that subscribe button and join our unit so you never miss the conclusion to stories like these. The treatment of the German prisoners at the Rees camp wasn't an exception. It was standard operating procedure. Every prisoner of war captured by American forces in Europe went through the same process. Delousing, medical inspection, clean clothes, and assignment to barracks with cots and blankets. And then came something that stunned every single German prisoner, without fail: food. That evening, at 1800 hours, the women were led to a makeshift dining hall. Folding tables, wooden benches, metal trays, and hot food. Each prisoner received a 14-ounce portion of beef stew with vegetables, 3 slices of white bread, an apple, and hot coffee with sugar. The total caloric intake was approximately 2,100 calories. For context, civilian rations in the final weeks of the Reich had plummeted to less than 1,000 calories a day. Many of these women hadn't eaten a full, hot meal in months. Greta stared at the stew. Steam rose from the tray. Gentle, reflective music. It smelled of real meat, of potatoes, of carrots. She looked around. Every prisoner wore the same expression of stunned disbelief. An older woman, perhaps 45, began to weep quietly as she ate. Another simply sat and stared at her tray, as if touching the food would make it vanish. Greta ate slowly, deliberately. Each bite was a revelation. The Americans were feeding their prisoners better than the Reich had fed its own citizens. Dramatic pause. How do you fight an enemy who feeds you after you are captured? How do you justify a war when the barbarian enemy treats you with more humanity than your own government? These were the questions swirling in Greta's mind, questions for which she had no answers. This humanitarian treatment wasn't pure altruism, it was brilliant strategy. General Dwight D. Eisenhower had issued clear directives on the matter. Every well-treated prisoner, he reasoned, was a walking, talking refutation of Nazi propaganda. Every prisoner was a potential agent who could weaken the enemy's will to fight from within. And it worked. Captured German soldiers wrote letters home describing the American treatment. These letters were often intercepted by German intelligence, but they were too numerous to censor completely. The word spread. By the end of April 1945, Entire units of the German army were surrendering specifically to American forces rather than the Soviets, not because the Americans were weak, but because they knew they would be treated according to the conventions of war. Greta spent 7 weeks at the camp in Ries before being moved to a more permanent facility in Belgium. During that time, she was never struck, never abused, never tortured. She worked in the camp kitchen, peeling potatoes and preparing meals for other prisoners. She received the same rations as the American guards. She had access to medical care when a foot infection worsened. A U.S. Army doctor treated her with penicillin, the miracle antibiotic that Germany had tried and failed to mass-produce for years. Slowly, methodically, reality replaced propaganda. The Americans weren't monsters. Germany hadn't just lost a military war, it had lost the moral war. In September 1945, Greta was released. The Reich was gone. There was no country to return to. She remained in France, working as a nurse in a hospital that treated both French civilians and former German POWs with nowhere else to go. In 1947, she immigrated to the United States under a visa program for medical professionals. In 1952, she became a U.S. citizen. She worked as a nurse in Chicago for 34 years. She married an American war veteran. She had 2 children. But she never forgot the moment Sergeant Miller cut her uniform with his knife, the moment she expected brutality and received sanitary procedure, the moment an entire architecture of lies collapsed in the face of a simple, decent reality. Greta Hoffmann passed away in 1998 at the age of 79. In her will, she left a letter for her grandchildren, explaining her choice to become an American. The letter read, "Emotional, soft music begins. I was taught to hate Americans. I was told they were barbarians without honor. But when I fell into their hands, they did not violate me. They did not torture me. They gave me a hot shower, clean clothes, and a warm meal. And that single, simple act of humanity destroyed 6 years of lies in 30 seconds. I chose to live in America because I learned on that day that a country that treats its captured enemies with dignity is a country that values humanity above ideology." Now, not every German prisoner was treated perfectly. There were abuses. There were camps where conditions were horrific, especially in the chaotic early months of 1945 when millions of surrendering soldiers overwhelmed the logistical capacity of the U.S. Army. But the standard, the official policy, the documented intent, was humane treatment according to the Geneva Conventions. And that standard saved lives, not just the lives of prisoners, but the lives of American soldiers who, when captured, were treated better because the Germans knew their own men were being treated with dignity. Reciprocity in the treatment of prisoners is one of the few, hard-won moral victories in a war defined by its horrors. What do you think of this incredible story of propaganda versus reality? Did you know about the stark contrast between what Germans were told to expect and what they actually experienced as American prisoners? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Every week, we bring you verified, fascinating stories that change the course of history.